In this sections, what I want to discuss is the concepts that form the basis of fieldwork. In our experience should tell us that when the students are designing their fieldwork, most of the time, one of the kind of like weakness they display is that they fail to make use of the correct concepts to frame their fieldwork. This will be one. This is one very important issues that geographical educators need to pay attention to, because the difference between you may say a general education and a geographical education is the ability to make use of geographical concepts to describe the research that students are engaged in when they are trying to develop their fieldwork. So here I will make use of the 14 specialized concepts plus 4 core concepts to illustrate how students can make use of these concepts when they're designing their fieldwork. So the 4 concepts that we have include place, space, scale, environment. These are the 4 core concepts. And then you have 14 specialized concepts. They include causality systems, equilibrium, feedback, inequality, representations, identity, globalization, interdependence, mitigations and adaptations, sustainability, risk, resilience, and thresholds. All these are the kind of concepts they have that has been formed, that has been identified by geographical educators to be important when we are trying to design fieldwork activities. The 4 concepts, this is I extract here from the Victorian curriculum, so which is very useful to try to explain what are the concepts are. For the first one, we have the place. So place, what does place refers to? Place understanding refers to the physical and human characteristic of the real place. So when we are trying to describe the concept of place, we need to pay attention to the physical as well as human character of the place. That is to say, what are the people within it? What are the physical parameters? What are the physical features? In a way, place does not only means the physical sense, but it also imaginative sense. That is to say, when we are trying to imagine the place, for example, you are trying to imagine your space, a supermarket, then you would make use of certain geographical imaginations to try to construct what is the boundary of the place, what is within the place, what is within a particular site. So apart from identifying the physical and human characteristic of the place, you sometimes need to exercise your imaginations in trying to define the boundaries of the place. It is also influenced by space. Again, place and space, they establish a dialogue in between. So whenever we think about the connections, we need to pay attention to this as well. Tangible character, what are the tangible, for example, landforms, people, in terms of the age, for example, that would be some tangible characteristic that you can see. And in addition, you have some intangible character, for example, scenic quality as well as culture. They also are important concepts that you need, the aspect that you need to pay attention to. The second clear concepts that we have is scale. The scales is about the way in which geographical phenomena and problems can be examined at different spatial levels. For scales, you have personal, local, national, international, and regional. And sometimes we often heard about this idea about local global nexus. In a way, we are talking about this idea about scales. That is to say, how the events at one scales would affect what happened in other scales. For example, we talk about the issues about city. So the urban scales. For example, when we talk about global warming, so what happened within the urban scales may have impact on the global scales. That's why when we are thinking about scales, we need to look at how the local scales affect the global, how different scales affect what happened in the other scales. You also have the idea about space. Space, you can see again, you have space, time, and space and place. They are interrelated, but space is a much more abstract. You have we talk about the spatial representations. For example, you have certain idea. For example, you have this idea about Asia as a space or Europe as a space. This is something that is not talking about the kind of very tangible aspect, but you also have the kind of what we call spatial representations. For example, you would imagine, for example, talking about this urban space. We are talking about urban space as a space of capitalism. In that sense, you can see that we are trying to imbue certain values, certain, you may sometimes say, ideologies into a certain space. When we are constructing spaces, we seem to have certain kind of spatial assumptions about the place. So that's why when we are thinking about space, we need to pay attention to this, to what the kind of cultural underpinnings. We also look at how people construct their space through different representations. So it is talking about this space. It is also sometimes referring to the, it allows us to understand the interaction between the place and networks created by flows of informations, people, and goods as well. So this is another aspect related to space. I would say that space is quite an abstract concept that people, students find it difficult to grapple with. Environment. So it is talking about the environment, the relationship between human and the environment. You may find that you may consider that the environment serves as a kind of backdrop. One of the reading of the environment is to consider it as a backdrop within which human activity takes place. It can be natural, it can be cultural environment. But at the same time, apart from being a backdrop or background of human activities, human is also constrained by the environment. They act as sometimes as a constraint over their behavioral choice. So for example, you are talking about the natural environment, then definitely your human activities can also be affected by the choice, by the human setting as well. So in that regard, we need to pay attention to also these the environment. So when you are trying to design your fieldwork, remember these are the four core concepts that you should be able to make use of. For example, we are talking about the issues about vegetations, then you would think about how the different scale impact upon one another. For example, you talk about soil, local scale, you talk about vegetation, global scales. So how they interact with one another. For example, you are talking about the issues about cultural landscape, cultural environment. For example, you talk about whether how cultural environment of a particular cities would affect the behavioral options of the citizens living in the cities. So that in that regard, you also need to pay attention to how the environment affect the behavioral options that citizens may have.